Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time we are taking a look behind the scenes at Apple's Q4 2024 earnings call.
Always interesting to get a peek behind the curtain, right?
Absolutely. We got the transcript and we are ready to break it all down.
Yeah.
Looking at what it means for Apple's future and what you should be paying attention to as a consumer or just an Apple enthusiast.
You know, it's always fascinating to see what's going on with Apple, especially a company that keeps things so close to the vest.
Right. Like, seriously, this transcript has some really, really interesting stuff in it.
Yeah.
Like, for starters, we're going to take a look at Apple Intelligence.
Okay.
Is it just hype, or is it going to be a real game changer?
Right.
We'll also examine what Tim Cook is saying about iPhone demand and how global trends could be impacting their sales.
Yeah, and I think we should also definitely dig into Apple services.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That's often overlooked, but it's kind of their secret weapon.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so let's just jump right in and start with that big news. Apple just announced record revenue for their September quarter, a cool $94.9 billion, which is up 6% from last year.
Yeah.
So that sounds pretty amazing, right?
On the surface, absolutely. But I think it's important to look a little deeper.
Yeah.
You know, a big chunk of that growth is coming from services,
Okay.
which saw a 12% jump to $25 billion.
Got it.
But the really interesting part is that product revenue only went up by 4%.
Okay. So why should we care about that? What does that kind of difference tell us?
Well, it suggests a shift.
Yeah.
You know, Apple is becoming less reliant on those one-time product sales, like when you go and buy a new iPhone,
Right.
and more focused on recurring revenue from things like subscriptions and apps.
Yep.
And that makes their income more stable and less tied to how many iPhones they sell each quarter.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Like the difference between selling someone a single cup of coffee versus getting them hooked on a monthly latte subscription.
Exactly.
You've got that steady income with the subscription.
Exactly. And so while those record revenue numbers are impressive, the real story is the growth of services.
Yeah.
I think that's really going to drive their success in the long run.
Awesome. Good to know. Now, speaking of products, we can't talk about Apple without talking about the iPhone.
Of course, the iPhone.
So iPhone revenue also hit a record for the September quarter, $46.2 billion.
Wow.
A 6% increase. And get this, they saw growth in every single region.
Those are great numbers, yeah. But there is a curious detail in this transcript.
Oh.
Tim Cook was very careful not to explicitly say that demand for iPhones outstripped supply this quarter,
Okay.
which is something he usually highlights, when it happens.
So what are we reading between the lines here? Is iPhone demand actually softening?
Potentially. It's something we need to keep an eye on, especially with the current economic climate, inflation, the possibility of a recession. People might be holding onto their phones a little bit longer.
Yeah, that's true. And something else we noticed was that the lead times for the iPhone 16 are actually pretty short, meaning there aren't any major supply constraints.
So we've been thinking about upgrading now. Might be a good time to snag that new iPhone.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay, so let's move on to something that I feel like has really got everybody buzzing: Apple Intelligence.
It's the big one.
Is it going to revolutionize the way we use our devices, or is it all just smoke and mirrors?
It's the question on everyone's mind.
So iOS 18.1 just dropped this week, and it's already giving us a little taste of what Apple Intelligence can do, and some of these new features are pretty mind-blowing.
Oh, yeah, like what?
So you can create videos and photos just by typing a description of what you want to see.
It's amazing how they're using AI to make things easier and more creative for everyone.
Yeah.
Not just, the tech experts.
Right. And the adoption rate for iOS 18.1 is actually twice as fast as it was for last year's 17.1.
Oh, wow.
Which I feel like that says something.
Yeah. It definitely shows people are excited about it.
Yeah.
Even though it's only available in U.S. English right now.
Right. But don't worry, more is on the way. In December, we're getting an update with even more powerful writing tools, visual intelligence capabilities, and get this ChatGPT integration.
Wow.
Plus, they're expanding the English language support to the UK, Australia, Canada, Ireland, and New Zealand.
So they're really going all in on this.
They are. This phased rollout, though, is interesting.
Yeah.
It's not typical for Apple to release software features in stages like this.
So what do you think is behind this new strategy?
I don't know. It might be a sign of just how complex Apple Intelligence actually is.
Yeah.
It's not just a few new features. It's a fundamental change in the way our devices understand and respond to us.
Yeah.
I think Apple's taking a very cautious approach,
Mm.
making sure that everything works flawlessly before they roll it out to a wider audience. They don't want to disappoint.
Yeah, they want to make sure this launch is a real success.
Yeah, I think it's a really smart move. I think they're building anticipation and managing expectations, which is important when you're introducing something this groundbreaking.
Totally.
Yeah.
And we also saw them launch some shiny new Macs this week.
Yes, with the new M4 chip family.
Amazing.
And the new Mac Mini is carbon neutral, which is awesome for those of us who want to, reduce our environmental footprint.
I love that about it. And, it also fits into this bigger trend that we're seeing with Apple and their focus on Apple Silicon.
Okay.
By designing and manufacturing their own chips, they have so much more control over the entire Mac experience from hardware to software.
Right. So that gives them a lot of freedom and flexibility to really innovate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it also makes you think, as AI gets more and more powerful, will the traditional computer even be relevant in the future?
Right.
It seems like they're preparing for all possibilities, continuing to develop powerful Macs while also pushing the boundaries with Apple Intelligence.
So hedging their bets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is probably a wise strategy in such a rapidly changing tech landscape.
Definitely. Okay, so before we move on to services, there's one more thing I want to touch on China.
Yeah.
With all the economic and political news lately, what's the situation with Apple in this, crucial market?
Yeah. It's a question a lot of people have.
It is, and it's a complex one.
Yeah.
So Tim Cook seemed cautiously optimistic. He mentioned that iPhone revenue in China was flat year over year.
Oh.
Which isn't ideal.
Right.
But it's also not a disaster considering all the, the economic challenges that China's been facing.
True.
But on a positive side, their installed base in China actually hit a record high.
Oh, wow.
And they're seeing a lot of new customers from Macs iPads and Apple Watch.
Interesting.
Which suggests that, Apple's brand is still very strong there and they're attracting new users.
Right.
Even if iPhone sales aren't booming.
Exactly.
But overall, I feel like China remains a little bit of a wild card for Apple.
Yeah, it does. Any major economic downturn there could definitely impact their results. It's a situation to watch closely.
Agreed. Okay, so we've talked about record revenue, but with a twist, iPhone demand and potential softening, the excitement and intrigue surrounding Apple Intelligence, new Macs, and the intrications of Apple Silicon, and the always interesting China situation. But we're not done yet. We still need to delve into Apple's services business, which is turning out to be a real powerhouse.
It really is. I think people might be surprised by just how impactful services have become for Apple.
Okay, so stay tuned because we're going to unpack all of that next.
We will. Come back. All right, so let's talk about Apple's secret weapon.
Ooh, secret weapon. I like it.
Services.
It's funny. When people think of Apple, they usually think iPhones and Macs.
Right.
Services kind of flies under the radar, but it's a huge part of their business.
It really is. And it just hit a major milestone.
Oh, yeah.
$100 billion in annual revenue.
$100 billion?
That's not just a big number for Apple. That's a huge number for any company.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
So what's driving that incredible growth? Is it like Apple Music, the App Store?
It's all those things, but I think the real key is this shift towards subscription models.
Okay.
Think about it. Instead of just selling you a song on iTunes, Apple Music gives you access to their entire library for a monthly fee.
Yeah, that's true. I haven't bought a song on iTunes in years.
Right? It's all streaming now.
Yeah.
And the beauty of these subscriptions is that they create this predictable and recurring revenue stream for Apple.
Right.
It makes their business less reliant on those big product launches and more stable over time.
So they're not just hoping you'll buy a new iPhone every year. They're hoping you'll keep paying for Apple Music, Apple TV, plus iCloud storage, and all those other services month after month.
Exactly. And it's working. They now have over 1 billion paid subscriptions across their platform.
Wow, 1 billion?
Which is double the number from just 4 years ago.
That's a lot of people hooked into the Apple ecosystem. It's really starting to feel like services is the real future of Apple, not just the iPhones and Macs.
I think that's a pretty fair assessment. While those products are still important, services is where we're seeing the most growth and innovation.
Yeah.
And it's where they're creating these sticky experiences that keep users coming back for more.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've established that services is a big deal, but what about Macs? They got some love this week with the new M4 chips and the launch of a carbon-neutral Mac Mini.
It's a clear sign that Apple isn't giving up on the Mac, even with all the focus on iPhones and services.
Right.
And those new M4 chips are a big step forward in terms of performance and energy efficiency.
And let's not forget The environmental aspect. Apple's commitment to sustainability is something I really appreciate.
Yeah, it's definitely a selling point for a lot of consumers, and it gives them a competitive edge.
For sure. Okay, so zooming out a bit, we're living in some pretty interesting times, economically speaking.
Right.
There's a lot of talk about inflation, a potential recession. How could this global landscape impact a company like Apple?
Well, it's a big question, and there's no easy answer. A downturn in the economy could definitely affect consumer spending,
Right.
which could lead to fewer people upgrading their iPhones or buying new Macs.
Yeah, and what about services? Would people be more likely to cut back on subscriptions if money's tight?
It's a possibility.
Yeah.
But it's also possible that people will actually turn to services like Apple TV Plus and Apple Arcade as more affordable entertainment options
Okay.
compared to going out to the movies or buying, expensive video games.
That's a really good point. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Some parts of their business could be hurt by an economic slowdown, while others might actually benefit.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that Apple is very aware of.
Uh-huh.
They're constantly analyzing the market and adjusting their strategies to adapt to these changing conditions.
So they're being proactive, trying to anticipate potential challenges.
They are. And they're taking steps to mitigate risks. For example, they're diversifying their supply chain
Okay.
to reduce their dependence on any single country.
Right. Kind of like don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but there's one crucial aspect of Apple's business we haven't really discussed yet.
What's that?
Their financials.
Ooh, yes. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of Apple's balance sheet.
That's where things get really interesting. We're going to explore how they're managing their cash flow, their debt levels, their overall financial health.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, so we're back, ready to really dive into these numbers, the numbers behind Apple's success.
All right, so let's talk balance sheets.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Well, one thing that jumps out right away is just the amount of cash that Apple has on hand.
Okay.
Like $157 billion in cash and marketable securities, to be exact.
Wow, that is mind-boggling. It's like they could buy a small country with that much cash.
It's a pretty powerful position to be in, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It gives them so much flexibility, when it comes to investing in their future, whether that's through research and development, strategic acquisitions, or even returning money to shareholders through dividends and stock buyback.
So they have a lot of options. What do you think they'll do with all that cash?
Well, historically, they've taken a pretty balanced approach, investing in their business while also rewarding their shareholders.
Okay.
So I wouldn't be surprised to see them continue with that strategy. Makes sense. Got to keep both Wall Street and Main Street happy.
Yeah.
But speaking of Wall Street, what about their profit margins? How are they doing on that front?
Their gross margin was 46.2% in Q4,
Okay.
which is incredibly high, especially for a company that makes physical products.
Okay, hold on. Break that down for me. What does gross margin even mean, and why is that number so important?
Sure. So think of it this way. Gross margin is the percentage of revenue that a company keeps after paying for the cost of goods sold.
Okay.
So, for example, if an iPhone costs Apple $500 to make and they sell it for $1,000, their gross margin would be 50%.
Okay, that makes sense. So a higher gross margin means they're making more profit on each product they sell.
Exactly. And Apple's high gross margin is a testament to a few things: their strong brand, their loyal customers, and their really efficient supply chain.
Yeah.
They're able to command these premium prices for their products while also keeping their costs under control.
That's impressive. It sounds like they have a pretty solid business model.
They do. But even with all their success, Apple isn't immune to challenges. We've already talked about the potential impact of a global recession, the uncertainties surrounding China.
Yeah.
And then there's the wild card of AI.
You're talking about Apple Intelligence. How could that be a challenge for them?
Well, it's a massive undertaking. And there are always risks associated with introducing new technology,
Yeah.
especially something as complex as AI.
Right. And we talked about some of those risks earlier, like bias and privacy concerns. Are there any others we should be thinking about?
Well, one thing to consider is the potential for unforeseen consequences.
Okay.
AI is still a relatively new field,
Okay.
and we're only beginning to understand its full capabilities and implications.
So it's like opening Pandora's box. You don't really know what's going to come out.
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
But that's also what makes it so exciting. AI has the potential to really revolutionize our lives in countless ways.
Right.
But we need to be mindful of the risks as we embrace those possibilities.
Okay, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. It's like Apple is this giant ship navigating through uncharted waters. There are so many factors to consider, so many potential storms on the horizon.
It's true. But Apple has a long history of innovation and resilience and adaptability.
Yeah.
They've weathered storms before, and I'm confident that they'll find a way to navigate these new challenges as well.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the complexity of Apple's business.
Yeah.
It's so much more than just, shiny gadgets. It's about global economics, technological innovation, consumer trends, and even ethical considerations.
It is, and it's a good reminder that even the most successful companies face constant pressure to evolve, adapt, and stay ahead of the curve.
So what's the biggest takeaway here for our listeners? What should they be paying attention to in coming months and years?
Well, I think the key question is, can Apple maintain its position as a leader in a world that's so rapidly being reshaped by AI? They're making big bets on Apple Intelligence, and the success or failure of that initiative could determine the course of the company for years to come.
And for us as consumers, I think it's a reminder that we have choices to make. Do we embrace these new technologies wholeheartedly, or do we approach them with a little bit of caution and skepticism?
Yeah, those are definitely some important questions to think about.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer, but I think it's crucial to be informed, to think critically, and to make conscious choices about the role we want technology to play in our lives.
Well said. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
Yeah.
We've covered Apple's record revenue, their strategic shift towards services, the excitement surrounding Apple Intelligence, the future of the Mac, their strong financial position, and the challenges they face in such a rapidly changing world.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. But hey, that's what we do here on The Deep Dive.
That's right.
So as always, the journey of learning and discovery continues. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Apple. Until next time.